I'm Kirk Anderson, and welcome back to the shop. This week's project is the last big project I have before I can say my wood shop is complete. I'm making a workbench. There's actually going to be 3 parts to this build, and this is part 1, building the base for the workbench. Well, the base is going to be built with 2x4s, but I'm going to mill them down so they don't actually look like 2x4s. I started by just putting them in the shop to dry them out and get them acclimated to the shop. And of course, the first part of the milling process is to run it through the joiner to get a nice straight surface. And then is to the planer to make the other side parallel and to plane it down to the thickness I wanted. Now the legs of the base are actually going to be made up of 2 pieces of this 2x4, so I have to glue them together. When you're doing a glue up like this, you need to ensure you have plenty of glue on the surface. Spread it out to a nice even film and let it sit clamped up for a minimum of 12 hours. Once the legs were dry, I did clean up the edges, and then I brought them to the table saw to cut them to length. Now the rails of the base are also made out of 2x4s, but they're not the exact same size as the 2x4s I used for the legs. So I did mill them down again on the joiner and the planer, and then I brought them to the table saw to cut them to the width I wanted. And then I just cut them to the length that I wanted. Now I'm building this base using lap joints, and the long rails that will be on the front and the back are too long to cut the laps on the table saw. So I made a jig, and I'm using a router to cut these laps. Now for the shorter rails and the legs, I'm able to cut the laps on the table saw using a stacked dado blade, and then run it through the dado blades many times until I get to the proper size that I want. Now it's time for assembly. Of course, all the joints will be glued and screwed. Ensure that there's a good film of glue. To ensure that I have a nice 90-degree angle on these joints, I'm clamping a speed square in there. Then I'm clamping the pieces together to ensure that the joint is nice and tight. And then I drive in the screws. Once the front and the backs are done, then it's just a matter of installing the side rails. And there again, glue, insert, clamp it up, make sure that the joint is nice and tight, and then drive in the screws. Now I'm going to be attaching the top using pocket hole screws. So prior to installing the top rails, I'm drilling some pocket holes into them. And not to repeat myself, but to repeat myself, glue, clamps, and screws. I don't know about your shop, but my shop, the floor is not level. So I'm putting some leveling feet on the legs. So I need to drill to put the T-nuts in. And to ensure that the T-nuts stay, I'm going to secure them in there with some CA glue. Then just hammer the T-nuts in, and then screw the leveling feet in. Now once the bench is complete, it's probably going to be a little heavy. So in order for me to move it around easily, I'm putting some Workbench casters on it. And now I'll be able to move the bench around with ease. Well, that concludes part 1 of this workbench build, the base. My initial plans for the workshop was to put a miter saw station here. But once I got the Incra 5000 for the table saw, I can do most of the miter cuts that I'll need to do accurately on the table saw. And I decided that a workbench would be more practical than a miter saw station. I hope you enjoyed this video and give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, all you woodworkers out there, Just get out there and cut some wood.